Welcome, Wapham crew, guys, gals, ghouls, friends, fiends, foes, whoever may be listening beyond the omniverse tonight. Climb aboard the mothership, secure your tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the rocky tops of the La Platas on a rocky mountain high. Get sucked into the vortex of the Four Corners and settle down snugly at mile marker 420 in colorful Colorado. It is Sunday, March 16th, Monday, March 17th for those of you across the pond and beyond. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining me tonight on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. I'm your host, TessaTNT, and we are broadcasting live from the Mile High Clubhouse tonight. If you're listening live right now, you may be listening to us on KPNL Radio, which you can find at KPNL Radio at kpnl-db.com. If you would like to watch or listen on one of our other avenues that we have going live right now, you can find us on YouTube under We Are Paradox Media, as well as Twitch under We Are Paradox Media 101. If you want to listen on your own time, whether you're working it or working out, you can listen to us on any venue that you listen to your podcasts, and you will find us there once more under We Are Paradox Media. So tonight it's story time with me, TessaTNT, and unfortunately we cannot broadcast live anymore on Facebook, and that's the reason why I'm going to do this really quick little thing that I've prepared. Trigger warning. This video may contain graphic violence, descriptions, or depictions of violence. Violence can be triggering for individuals who have experienced violence or have been exposed to traumatic events, as well as discrimination and hate speech. Content that includes racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and other forms of discrimination can be deeply upsetting and triggering for those who have been subjected to such attitudes and behaviors. Viewer discretion and listener discretion is advised. This is for educational purposes only. Alright, so we're going to get back into the book we were reading prior to this, and the book is The Nazis and the Occult. Been pretty interesting for sure, but as I mentioned before, this is for educational purposes only. Trigger warning, as I said before, there's going to be violence and discrimination, etc. Alright, well, let's get into it, shall we? It's unfortunate that YouTube's not letting us broadcast, but hopefully we'll get that fixed soon. I put in a thing saying, it's not what you think it is. I'm not hyping these guys up or supporting them, or in no way do I promote hate or violence or any such thing as that. Alright, one people, one leader, one fate. It is unbelievable to what extent one must betray a people in order to rule it. Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf. We pride ourselves on being individuals, but as the Nazi era demonstrated, anyone can be swept along on a tide of collective emotion if they allow their instincts to overrule their intellect. This primitive need to be part of the tribe or group is difficult to resist, as it is linked to our survival instinct, and it requires a concerted effort to retain the sense of individuality when a group is acting as one. The phenomenon was not unique to Nazi Germany. It can be seen today in crowd behavior at sporting events and rock concerts, during times of national crisis or the irrational devotion of religious cults, and in the mentality of the mob. When individuals relinquish their free will and submit to the collective will, they behave like a herd of animals or a flock of birds, who act as one without any apparent sign, or instruction. Another danger revealed by the Nazi experience is the tendency of a society to project its strengths and failings onto an individual who will assume the role of mother or father of the nation. In this way, a charismatic leader such as Hitler is empowered to act as a focus for his nation's neurosis, or to express it in magical terms. To act as the medium to channel the psychic energy of his followers. Hitler may not have been a ritual magician in the traditional sense of the word, but that effectively is what he was, as he consciously exploited the nation's prejudice against the Jews, knowing that the Germans would consent to his plan to make a sacrificial offering of the national scapegoat to exercise a collective anxiety. Oh, let me check my music volume. I think it might be too loud. Yeah, that is quite loud. Alright. The Freemasons. Hitler's paranoid obsession with Freemasonry originated in his mistaken belief that it was primarily a Jewish esoteric society, and that it possessed arcane secrets that could undermine the state of its members were allowed to infiltrate the corridors of power. All the supposed abominations, the skeletons and death's heads, the coffins and the mysteries, are mere bogies for children. But there is one dangerous element, and that is the element that I have copied from them. They form a sort of priestly nobility. They have developed an esoteric doctrine not merely formulated but imparted through the symbols and mysteries in degrees of initiation. The hierarchical organization and the initiation through symbolic rites, that is to say without bothering the brain but by working on the imagination through magic and symbols of occult. All this is the dangerous element I have taken over. Don't you see that our party must be of this character? An order that is what it has to be, an order, the hierarchical order of a secular priesthood, ourselves or the Freemasons or the Church. There is room for one of the three and no more. We are the strongest of the three and shall get rid of the other two. The manipulation of the masses. As history has shown, it is rarely the passive female qualities which manifest in the group's soul. Notable exceptions occurred during the benign influence of the Mahatma Gandhi, whose passive revolution forced the English out of India, and, more recently, in the outpouring of national grief, which marked the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. Her sudden and unexpected death touched the long-neglected passive female qualities in the British psyche. Many people were confounded by their own beliefs, acknowledged for so long. Hitler's opinion on the subject of mass manipulation is revealing, although we have to wonder if he expressed himself in these precise terms, since the source of the following quotes is the discredited Rockies. But Rockies was known to have paraphrased passages from Hitler's speeches and informal after-dinner discussions or table talks, so it seems reasonable to assume that the substance of this extract, taken from Voice of Destruction, is accurate at least. My enemies have turned up their noses at me. They have asked, full of envy, why is this man so successful with the masses? Was this just a lucky fluke? Was it due to the uncritical mind of the masses? No, it was thanks to us, to our assiduity, and to the technique we perfected. It is true that the masses are uncritical, but not in the way these idiots of Marxists and reactionaries imagine. The masses have their critical faculties too, but they function differently from those of the private individual. The masses are like an animal that obeys its instincts. They do not reach conclusions by reasoning. My success in initiating the greatest people's movement of all time is due to my never having done anything in violation of the vital laws and the feelings of the mass. These feelings may be primitive, but they have the resistance and indestructibility of natural qualities. A once intensely felt experience in the life of the masses, like ration cards and inflation, will never again be driven out of their blood. The masses have a simple system of thinking and feeling, and anything that cannot be fitted into it disturbs them. It is only because I take their vital laws into consideration that I can rule them. I have been reproached for making the masses fanatic and ecstatic. I can lead the masses only if I tear them out of their apathy. Only the fanatic mass can be swayed. The mass that is apathetic and dull is the greatest threat to unity. So Roshning noted, he had made the masses fanatic, he explained, in order to fashion them into the instruments of his policy. He had awakened the masses, he had lifted them out of themselves and given them meaning and a function. He had been reproached with the appealing of their lowest instincts. Actually, he was doing something quite different. If he were to go to the masses with reasonable deliberations, they would not understand him. But if he awakened corresponding feelings in them, they followed the simple slogans he presented to them. Hitler again said, "At a mass meeting, thought is eliminated, and because this is the state of mind I require, because it requires to me the best sounding board for my speeches, I order everyone to attend the meetings, where they become part of the mass whether they like it or not, intellectuals and bourgeois as well as workers. I mingle the people, I speak to them only as the mass. I am conscious that I have no equal in the art of swaying the masses, not even Goebbels. Everything that can be learned with the intelligence, everything that can be achieved by the aid of clever ideas, Goebbels can do. But real leadership of the masses cannot be learned, and remember this, the bigger the crowd, the more easily it is swayed. Also, the more you mingle the classes, peasants, workers, black-coated workers, the more surely will you achieve the typical mass character. Don't waste time over intellectual meetings and groups drawn together by mutual interests. Anything you may achieve with such folk today by means of reasonable explanation may be erased tomorrow by an opposite explanation. But what you tell the people in the mass in a receptive state of fanatic devotion will remain like words received under a hypnotic influence, ineradicable and impervious to every reasonable explanation. But just as the individual has neurosis, which must not be disturbed, so the mass has its complexes that must not be awakened. The entire weight of the masses rests on the party, and the party is itself a constituent part of the mass. Mastery always means the transmission of a stronger will to a weaker one. How shall I press my will upon my opponent? By first splitting and paralyzing his will, putting him at loggerheads with himself and throwing him into confusion. It's good fortune for the government that the masses don't think, otherwise human society as we know it might cease to exist. Chapter 4. Astrology in the Third Reich. Nobody believes in astrology more than Herr Hitler. The best clients of the International Institute in London are the private astrologers in Berchtesgaden. Every month they ask for new astrological documents. This is because Herr Hitler believes in astrology, and he proves it. It is not by accident that his coups are all made in the month of March. Before striking, he chooses the most favorable time indicated by the stars, and March is assuredly his best month. And that was by Gazette de la Somme, 5 April 1939. In the spring of 1923, Germany's foremost amateur astrologer, Frau Elsbeth Ebertin, received a letter from an admirer in Bavaria asking her to draw up the horoscope of a man who had just taken control of a minor political party in Munich. The writer had convinced himself that the new leader of the German Workers' Party was destined for great things, and she wanted the rest of the nation, which was still recovering from the Great War, to share her hopes for the future. She supplied Frau Ebertin with the date and place of the man's birth as 20 April 1889. At Braunau am in Austria, but withheld his name. Accepting the challenge, the seer of Görlitz, as she was known, duly drew up the chart which she published with a commentary in the 1924 edition of her popular almanac. Ein Blick in die Zukunft, a glimpse into the future. Although Frau Ebertin had not been given her subject's time of birth, an essential detail for the casting of an astrological chart, she made an eerily accurate forecast by assuming he was born in the morning and producing what is known as a progressed horoscope, which goes beyond a psychological profile to predict the subject's prospects for a specific period in their life. Her chart suggested that this radical political activist did not need to ally himself with dark forces, but merely had to seize the predetermined opportunities that would present themselves in due course to ensure that the prediction would be fulfilled, she concluded. A man of action born on April 20, 1889, with the sun in the 28th degree of Aries at the time of his birth, had exposed himself to personal danger by reckless action and could very likely trigger an uncomfortable crisis. His constellations show that this man is to be taken very seriously indeed. He is destined to play a Führer role in future battles. The man I have in mind with his strong Aries influence is fated to sacrifice himself for the German nation, and to face up to all circumstances with audacity and courage, even when it is a matter of life and death, and to give an impulse which will burst forth quite suddenly to a German freedom movement. But I will not anticipate destiny. Time will show, but the present state of affairs at the time I write this cannot last. The subject of the prediction was, of course, Adolf Hitler, who fulfilled the first part of the prophecy by staging a putsch in the Bavarian capital, not long after the publication of Ebertin's almanac. Although the armed uprising was an ignominious failure, Hitler found a sympathetic ear among the judges in court and was able to hijack the proceedings for propaganda purposes. Frau Albertine was later rewarded by being granted a private audience with the Nazi leader, whom she described as shy and self-conscious, in contrast to his public speaking persona, when she witnessed the performance of A Man Possessed. He subsequently drew up a second, more detailed horoscope based on the assumption that Hitler had been born at 6:22 p.m., which she considered more likely as this fitted his personality. She concluded her second report with the prophetic words, "It will turn out that recent events, meaning the Feldputsch, will not only give this movement inner strength, but external strength as well, so that it will give a mighty impetus to the pendulum of world history." Hitler's horoscope. The new natal chart revealed that Hitler's birth occurred on the cusp of Aries and Taurus, which signified that he could be driven by unchecked ambition. His ascendant, the degree of the zodiac immediately on the eastern horizon at the moment of birth, was the 25th degree of Libra, and his natal sun was in the 1st degree of Taurus. This would indicate someone for whom self-expression is an all-consuming passion either through the arts, acting, or public speaking. Neptune provides the ability to inspire, but can also end in the haranguing of bystanders to no avail. Although Frau Albertine did not say so, this profile would be likely to produce an evangelical political or cult leader, and someone who was self-sufficient. But there were other influences which augured ill for this individual, namely a Venus-Mars conjunction, which suggested a tendency to stifle a craving for recognition out of fear of rejection. Venus and Mars were also in Taurus with Mercury in Aries, which emphasized a stubborn, self-centered aspect of his personality, which would ensure that he would not be easily deterred by delays or obstructions, nor would he be discouraged by the opinion of other people or swayed by their objections. The other influential aspect of the chart was Capricorn, another Earth sign. In Hitler's chart, both the Moon and Jupiter were in this sign, which meant that this pragmatic, hard-headed aspect of his personality was reinforced. But the flip side of this quality is intolerance, for under certain conditions, the virtues ordained by the stars can easily become vices. Serious astrologers agree that the stars set out a blueprint for our lives, but free will, not fate, determines each person's destiny and also that of the nations. Hi, Daryl. Good to see ya. Of the remaining planets, Saturn was in the 13th degree of Leo, a fire sign. Uranus was in the 20th degree of Libra, while Neptune and Pluto were in Gemini, both air signs, thus giving rise to a conflict of emotion and intellect which could lead to spontaneous, ill-considered actions or, conversely, prevarication arising out of fear of being held responsible for the consequences of one's actions. Although the sun sign is the most significant factor in determining the main themes in a person's life, it is a popular fallacy that one's future is determined by this aspect alone. It is, in effect, mediated by what are known as the quadruplicities of qualities: the cardinal creation, fixed preservation, and mutable adjustment signs. The strength of Taurus, Capricorn, and Libra in Hitler's horoscope meant there was an uncommonly strong tendency towards dominance, and aggression of his actions were called into question, of plans were frustrated. A creature of habit, he would find it almost impossible to accept change or even consider that another person might have the solution that he sought. Such personalities, when opposed, inevitably determine their own efforts and ultimately have a tendency to pull down everything around them because they cannot admit, even to themselves, that they might be wrong. Another factor in determining the future prospects and actions of an individual are the relative aspects between the planets at the time of their birth. In Hitler's chart, Saturn was square at 90 degrees to Mars, which indicates a distrustful, suspicious nature. Saturn was also square to Venus in this natal chart, which suggests an emotionally confused personality who avoids intimate relationships and may express his sexual nature in unnatural ways. This aspect reveals a self-indulgent idealist who can take duty to an extreme. Such individuals may imagine that they have been born to bear a burden or are destined to suffer because they are misunderstood. A common complaint of false messiahs who seek followers and lead fanatical religious cults into self-destruction. Mercury in opposition to Uranus compounds the problem by ensuring that the individual is totally self-absorbed, lacking true compassion and preferring to channel his affection into those who will not spurn them, such as animals and children. Saturn sextile at 60 degrees to Uranus nurtures an authoritarian personality, while Neptune in conjunction with Pluto can incline a weak individual to retreat into self-delusion. Venus in conjunction with Mars emphasizes robust self-confidence, but also a certain inflexibility. People with this aspect see everything as stark black and white and tend to harbor resentments for years, long after the event which gave rise to such feelings. The Sun trine at 120 degrees to the Moon and Jupiter, which were in conjunction, appeared to prefigure success but indicated that this particular subject hungers for status and public approval. In fact, the need for approval and acceptance will be addictive, particularly from those he perceives as having superior social standing. And if it is withdrawn, love of the people could turn to hatred, as their capriciousness would be viewed as betrayal of trust. The Moon-Jupiter conjunction often creates immature and flawed personalities who crave attention and can exhibit childlike temper tantrums if deprived of the appreciation they believe they deserve. In conclusion, the chart reveals an emotionally conflicted, unstable, neurotic, and manipulative, self-centered personality whose overriding need to overcome feelings of failure emerges to overcome a lack of self-worth. This would be the assessment of a modern astrologer with a basic understanding of psychology. But, needless to say, Frau Ebertin was highly selective in her reading of the Führer's chart. Other contemporary German astrologers who drew up Hitler's chart were disturbed by what they saw, and some even tried to convey their forebodings to those who might do something before it was too late. With the chart drawn and the numerous planetary influences recognized, it would be possible for an accomplished astrologer to draw up a second chart for a specific date in the future, when alignments like those or at the moment of birth could be expected again. Such a date would be seen as exceptionally favorable for taking crucial decisions and, if acted upon, would almost certainly guarantee success in Hitler's case. Such a positioning is believed to have occurred, again, early in 1940, 10 May, being the date he launched his invasion of France, Belgium, and Holland. Military historians tend to dismiss the entire astrological aspect out of hand, citing Hitler's desire to give his troops as long a period of dry weather as possible since he was haunted by the prospect of his army becoming bogged down in the muddy fields of Flanders, as the German army had been during his own service in the First World War. In the event, his victory in 1940 was so swift and overwhelming that it gave birth to a new strategic term, Blitzkrieg, lightning war, and it convinced many in Germany and abroad who were familiar with the influence the stars can exert on our destiny that Hitler had been advised by an astrologer. Frau Ebertin's fate adds a curious postscript to her predictions. She was killed in an Allied air raid in 1944, having refused to leave her home because the townspeople believed that as long as she remained, no harm could come to them. According to her son, she had foretold the date of her own death, and she also knew which of her neighbors would die on that day because at one time or another she had cast their charts, leading her to conclude that they would all die together. The case for astrology. Those who do not believe that planetary alignments can influence our lives will argue that Hitler was the product of this upbringing, specifically a domineering father and an overindulgent mother, rather than the subtle stresses of cosmic tides that serious astrologers who operate within a spiritual tradition see more than the external effects noted by the fortune tellers who draw up horoscopes for the popular press. They will be acutely aware of the invisible mechanism behind the universe which determines the psychological configuration peculiar to each person who is literally a child of their time. Hitler was fated to assume the role he did only in the sense that he gravitated to the center of the political storm brewing up in Germany at that time because of his psychological makeup. He responded to the nation's call for a leader with his temperament, but if he had not stepped forward, a similar individual might have fulfilled the role intended for him. In short, the random factors of Hitler's birth ensured that he was in the right place at the right time to offer Germany the leader it desired and, one might say, deserved. Nostradamus and the Nazis. According to many experts in the ancient art of divination, Frau Ebertin was not the first astrologer to foresee the rise of Hitler and his Nazi party. Nostradamus, the 16th century seer of Ceylon, was said to have encoded his predictions in the collection of cryptic verses known as the Censures, which have been the subject of heated debate for the past 400 years. It is thought that this Prince of Prophets obscured the true meaning of his visions because he feared being accused of practicing sorcery, but he may also have left them open to interpretation because he intended his verses to be pondered upon by scholars, and not by a largely illiterate population who would fear they had no influence over their own lives if the verses proved the existence of predestination. He made this clear in a warning to those seeking to know the future without having first acquired knowledge of the secret art of divination. Let those who read this verse ponder its meaning. Let the common crowd and the unlearned leave it alone. All of them, idiot astrologers and barbarians, keep off. He who knows the other thing, let him be a priest of the right. It is tempting in retrospect to interpret various quatrains as foretelling the rise of Hitler and the outbreak of the Second World War. In the farthest depths of Western Europe, a child will be born of a poor family, who by his speeches will seduce great numbers. His reputation will grow even greater in the Eastern domain. Both Hitler's annexation of Austria in 1938 and his adoption of the swastika also appear to have been foreseen. The great priest of the party of Mars who will subjugate the Danube. The cross carried by the crook, and his initial military successes are accurately foretold. He will transform into Greater Germany, Brabant, Flanders, Ghent, Burgess, and Boulogne. Then there was the much-quoted verse, "Hunger-maddened beast will make the streams tremble. Most of the land will be under Hister. In a cage of iron, the Great One will be dragged, when the child of Germany observes nothing." This could read as an image of the Blitzkrieg of 1940 when German tanks swept across the Franco-Belgian border to occupy the Low Countries. Hitler was regarded at the time as a man who repeatedly failed the honor agreements and treaties, making him the child of Germany, who observes nothing, although the reference to the Great One in the cage of iron remains obscure. Hister, however, is more likely to refer to the Ister, a classical name for the Danube, making the prediction most of the land will be under Hister, a reference to a flood rather than military invasion. For those who doubt the possibility that man can foresee the future, it is worth recalling the tale often told of Nostradamus and his final prediction. Shortly before his death in 1566, he asked an engraver to inscribe a date on the metal plate to be placed on his coffin alongside his remains. The date was 1700, the year he predicted he would finally be laid to rest. The engraver did not understand how the seer could be interred 134 years after being buried, but did as he had been asked. Exactly 134 years later, the coffin was exhumed by the French authorities, who needed to satisfy themselves that this was indeed the coffin of Nostradamus. So they opened the casket to identify the skeleton, and there, clutched in the bony fingers, was the metal plate engraved with the year of his exhumation, 1700. Prophecy and propaganda. The enemy is now making use of horoscopes in the form of handbills dropped from planes in which a terrible future is prophesied for the German people. But we know something about this ourselves. I am having counter-horoscopes worked up which we are going to distribute, especially in the occupied areas. This was by Goebbels in his diary, 16 March 1942. Is that today? Yeah, it is. Wow, that's weird. During the first months of the Second World War, prior to the invasion of France, the Nazis waged a crude but evidently effective psychological campaign against the civilian population of the Low Countries, who were then living under the threat of imminent attack. Leaflets were dropped containing pro-Nazi interpretations of the prophecies, made by Nostradamus, as well as fake astrological magazines in Dutch, French, and Flemish containing phony predictions of future German victories. Historians attribute the crushing defeat of France, Belgium, and Holland in the offensive of May 1940 to purely practical factors. The ingrained defeatism of the French, the superiority of the German forces, their speed, and the element of surprise gained by their audacious strategy of attacking through the Ardennes to circumvent impregnable French defenses known as Maginot Line. But there are those who believe it was the Nazis' employment of psychological warfare which proved highly effective in softening up the opposition and convincing the defenders that resistance was futile. The strategy was considered so successful that it was copied by the Allies later that same year. The idea had originated that Frau Goebbels, wife of Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda and Enlightenment, who had chanced upon a book entitled Mysteries of the Sun and the Soul, in which the author made a compelling case for interpreting one of the 400-year-old quatrains as foreseeing an expansion of the German Reich after a bloody conflict with France, Britain, and Poland. Most astonishing was the naming of the year in which this conflict would take place, 1939, which had been arrived at by calculating the date from which England would see the monarchy change 7 times in a period of 290 years. According to the author Dr. Kritzinger, this could only refer to the period following the execution of Charles I on January 30th, 1649. Consequently, Dr. Kritzinger was summoned to Goebbels' office on 4 December 1939, where he was invited to identify other verses which might be adopted in support of Nazi policy. Kritzinger was dismayed at the prospect of being recruited by a regime he despised, and so he stalled by playing the absent-minded academic, finally provoking the ever-patient Goebbels into terminating the interview. Frustrated but not discouraged, the Reich minister, known to his enemies as the Poison Dwarf on account of his diminished stature and vitriolic tongue, turned for help to a paranoid anti-Semite whom he knew he could count on to comprise his principles in the interests of National Socialism. Kraft. Karl Ernst Kraft, 1900-45, was a Swiss-born astrologer whose talents had come to light on the 2nd of November, 1939, when he wrote a report for his Gestapo paymaster, Dr. Fessel, informing him of an attempt on the Führer's life which would take place in the coming week. Prior to this, he had been gainfully employed in drawing up the astrological charts of Winston Churchill and the leaders of the countries Germany expected to be at war with in the coming months in an attempt to forecast their reaction and expose their weaknesses. Fessel dismissed the warning as the raving of a crank, but was forced to re-examine it when the failed assassination took place as predicted on the 8th of November. A time bomb placed in a pillar at a Munich beer hall exploded just minutes after the Nazi leader had left the building. 7 party members who had been commemorating the beer hall putsch of 1923 were killed and many others were seriously injured. It has been suggested that the Nazis planted the bomb to be able to accuse their neighbors of attempting a coup, thus giving Hitler an excuse for invasion. Certainly they would have had no second thoughts about sacrificing several of their own if it brought about the desired result, but time bombs were unreliable, making it highly unlikely that the leadership would have risked the device exploding prematurely. The SS leadership suspected disloyal elements within the party but were unable to unearth any physical evidence. It is said that in desperation Himmler consulted an Austrian psychic, who went into a trance on Himmler's sofa and described 3 foreigners conspiring with Otto Trasser, who was known to have Soviet sympathies. Inner voices. Hitler's narrow escape has been cited as yet another example of the many occasions on which the Führer was saved from certain death by the dark forces he had pledged himself to serve, while conventional historians put the incident down to pure luck. However, there is another, more plausible explanation for Hitler's extraordinary run of good fortune in the early years of his leadership, as well as the precognitive dream he had in the trenches. In those years, like Joan of Arc, he heeded the inner voice which he had credited with awakening him to his destiny in Pacewalk Military Hospital near Berlin in 1918, when he was suffering from the effects of mustard gas. He allowed his inner voice to guide him to the early victories from 1939 to 1941, while his general staff urged caution. Again, Orthodox historians would simply attribute Hitler's initial victories to his uncanny ability to read the political situation and anticipate his opponent's reaction. As for the revelation he experienced in Pacewalk, it seems likely that his alleged blindness was psychosomatic and not due to the gas. His hysterical nature simply could not accept Germany's defeat, so he literally refused to see the truth. On the 13th of October 1918, I was caught in a heavy British gas attack at Ypres. I stumbled back with burning eyes, taking with me my last report of war. A few hours later, my eyes had turned into glowing coals and it had grown dark around me. It was while in the hospital recovering from his ordeal that he learned of Germany's surrender. Everything went black before my eyes. I tottered and groped my way back to the ward, threw myself on my bunk, and dug my burning head into my blanket and pillow. So it had all been in vain all the sacrifices and privations, in vain the hours in which, with mortal fear clutching at our hearts, we nevertheless did our duty, or in vain the death of 2 million who died. Had they died for this? Did all this happen only so that a gang of wretched criminals could lay hands on the fatherland? I knew that all was lost. Only fools, liars, and criminals could hope for mercy from the enemy. In these nights, hatred grew in me, hatred for those responsible for this deed, miserable and degenerate criminals. The more I tried to achieve clarity on the monstrous events in this hour, the more the shame of indignation and disgrace burned my brow. Adolf Hitler in Mein Kampf. Tessa refused to inform Hitler of Kraft's prediction, fearing he might share the fate of the assassin George Asler for having failed to warn the Führer. But Kraft was not prepared to be overlooked. He sent a telegram to Rudolf Hess, bragging about his prediction and offering his services and his unswerving loyalty to the Reich. While Kraft dreamt of fawning at the Führer's feet with his charts under his arm and the fate of the nations in his hands, members of the Gestapo were already en route to his front door. They arrested him on suspicion of being a co-conspirator in the November bomb plot, but after many uncomfortable hours of questioning, he was able to persuade them that he had merely foreseen the incident in Hitler's horoscope. Goebbels was skeptical of precognition in principle, but was suitably impressed with Kraft's knowledge of this subject. He enlisted the astrologer in his campaign of disinformation and defeatism, which culminated with the publication in 1941 of How Nostradamus Foresaw the Future of Europe, which put a pro-Nazi spin on the centuries. For centuries. Kraft has subsequently been elevated to the role of Hitler's astrologer by historians who assumed his influence was far greater than it was in reality, having been misled by exaggerated claims in Louis de Wohl's sensationalistic autobiography, The Stars in War and Peace, as well as ill-informed articles in various occult publications. In fact, Kraft appears to have been little more than a freelance consultant who fell out of favor after 1941 when he failed to repeat his earlier success. Having outlived his usefulness, Kraft was deported to a concentration camp in 1942, where he died in 1945, shortly before the end of the war. The Empire Strikes Back. In the United States, astrologers are at work to prophesy an early end for the Fuhrer. We know that type of work as we have often done it ourselves. We shall take up our astrological propaganda again as soon as possible. I expect quite a little of it, especially in the United States and England. Goebbels' Diary, 28 April 1942. In 1940, the war was going badly for the British, who were besieged on their beleaguered island from the air by the Gorg's Luftwaffe, while their supplies were being sunk by the U-boat wolf packs, prowling the treacherous waters of the Atlantic. The bulk of the British Army was still recovering after the miraculous evacuation from Dunkirk, although there was some good news from the Second Front in Africa, where the British were discovering that the Italians lacked the fighting spirit of their German allies. Desperate to turn the tide, the British took a leaf out of Goebbels' book and established a covert black ops group to wage their own propaganda war. They enlisted the help of Hungarian immigrant and astrologer Louis de Wohl, Ludwig von Wohl Mussolini, 1903-61, a colorful and controversial figure. He was granted the rank of captain after he had convinced them that he could anticipate the advice Hitler would be given by his personal astrologer, Karl Kraft, with whom he claimed to have clashed prior to his escape from Germany. An unrepentant fantasist, de Wohl had invented an exotic past for himself which involved a dramatic meeting with Dr. Goebbels, who, he claimed, had himself offered him a position in the propaganda ministry as resident astrologer, an offer which put de Wohl in conflict with the conspiracy-obsessed Kraft. On his arrival in England, de Wohl was put to work writing fake predictions for counterfeit copies of a popular German astrological magazine, Der Zenit, which were printed in England and smuggled into Germany and the occupied countries. The plan was to convince the Germans that the magazine's prophet was uncommonly accurate by the simple expedient of printing the predictions several months after the events had occurred. The hope was that those who were fooled into believing that the magazine was genuine would then be demoralized by other fictitious forecasts of crushing defeats for the Axis powers predicted for the coming months. Unfortunately, several crates of fake publication were intercepted by the Gestapo, who noted that the credited editor of the latest issue, Dr. Korsch, had been dead for several years. De Wohl was then shipped off to America in early 1941, where he toured U.S. news networks offering a damning psychological profile of the Nazi leader, which culminated in a prediction of Hitler's imminent death, in the hope that this news would filter back to Berlin. In retrospect, de Wohl's reading of Hitler's horoscope was surprisingly perceptive. Comparing Hitler's chart with that of Napoleon, de Wohl concluded that they shared the same alignment of Saturn, suggesting that Hitler would die or be overthrown within a few years. He also predicted the violent death of Hitler's mistress, although at the time no one knew of her existence outside the Nazi inner circle, and he also foresaw defeat for the German army on the Eastern Front. Despite the fact that the Russian campaign had just begun and seemed to presage another lightning victory for the Wehrmacht. The British clearly valued his contributions to the campaign, and in 1943, under the auspices of black propaganda spymaster Sefton Delmer, de Waal spent months in seclusion compiling a 124-page book entitled Nostradamus Propheziet den Kriegsverlauf. Nostradamus predicts the course of the war, which included 50 verses written by himself but attributed to the seer of Ceylon and annotated with a scholarly commentary predicting defeat for the Reich. Let me see how far this one is. Yeah, we might as well go to our first music break. And I figured for this music break, well, for all of our music breaks this evening, we might pick up the tempo, give us some light in all this darkness we've been reading about. So, we're going to be hearing from King Cinnamon with Fantastic, Osney Bronx, Dance as a Lion, and King Cinnamon with Al Emo Adarella. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this music break.
We swap on the beat. Shabba, like the water bam bam. King Cinnamon. Oh shit, baddest. Take your bam bam anywhere you day. Know your bam bam, it is a Friday. Come on, let's ball, it is a holiday. Anything you want, baby, I will pay. Take your bam bam anywhere you day. Know your bam bam, it is a Friday. Come on, let's go, it is a holiday. Anything you want, baby, I will pay. Fantastic. Baby girl, you romantic. Fantastic. Baby girl, you romantic. Gucci brother, baby, gather something. Come on closer, baby, gather 19. I know you better, but I am the king. Your backside bigger than Bombay. Baby girl, broncotum. I like the way you whine your broncotum. Baby girl, broncotum. I like the way you whine your broncotum. Jamaica, Ghana. Shout out to the ladies in Asia, Nigeria, South Africa. Say me love you. Please me, baby. Yeah. Turn up from you. Take your bam bam anywhere you day. Play your bam bam, it is a Friday. Come on, let's go, it is a holiday. Anything you want, baby, I will pay. Shake your bam bam anywhere you day. Play your bam bam, it is a Friday. Come on, let's go, it is a holiday. Anything you want, baby, I will pay. Fantastic. Baby girl, you romantic. Give me love. Me want you, me love you. Give me love. Oh, give me love. Hey, please me, baby. Yeah, turn up from you. Yeah, take your bam bam anywhere you day. Play your bam bam, it is a Friday. Come on, let's go, it is a holiday. Anything you want, baby, I will pay. Shake your bam bam anywhere you day. Play your bam bam, it is a Friday. Come on, let's go, it is a holiday. Anything you want, baby, I will pay. Fantastic. Baby girl, you romantic. Fantastic. Baby girl, you romantic.
Up on speed.
Kanyi kele Chineke makwa na limo mbunde njemono. Kanyi kele onye nwa imakwa na limo mbunde njemono. Alimo, Alime Gerelo, Alimo, Alime Gerelo, Alimo State, Alime Gerelo, Alimo, Alime Gerelo, Alimo State, Alime Gerelo, Alimo, Alime Gerelo, Democracy Gerelo, Ndime Gerelo, Alimo, Alime Gerelo, Alimo, Alime Gerelo, Alimo State, Alime Gerelo, Alimo, Alime Gerelo, Democracy Gerelo. Me Mariela, and the Gamma making head down. A very marama, over no marama, best lady marama, her excellency, and again, your hammer, and again, your hammer, oh, man, down on your need your hammer, oh, man, down on your wall, and again, make him modern mouth, and again, make him modern mouth. Emeka put down no boy. Oh yeah. Wa wuleno. Emeka put down no boy. O come at him. We me wem poso. Emeka make him modern mouth. Emeka make him modern mouth. Ndem jejemba. Mwan jejemba. Ndem jemano. Deputy governor must get chilike. Gerard Ronna Karaka, Wokoma de Ma, Porabo, Deputy Governor, Deregima, Alukuta Deregima, Alimo State Deregima, Ala Nigeria Maragima, Onya Jemono, Stanley Wamuche Karaka, Stanley Onya Babamba, President Good Life Foundation, Shirike, President General, Senate Group of Companies, President General. Financial matter karaka, alo were diregima, alambise diregima, alimo state diregima, ala Nigeria maragima, onye jemano, Franklin Neji shirike, nebe arabido hotels, ABC transport karaka, alo were diregima, alambise diregima, alimo state diregima, ala Nigeria maragima. Uchonya go chande, honorable Wokoma Dima, onye horo ni akeleli ya o. Ma wugi ye, ginando tugio, ma wunule, mjiji gari jinala Imo State yo. Ma wugi ye, ginando tugio, ma wunule, mini gari zonala Imo State yo. Alo were diregima. Alo were diregima, Alimo State diregima, ala Nigeria maragima, the chairman, Orange Drugs Limited, Jisa Anthony Ifani Chubundu business and na Ishirike, Ikenga the Chele, pride of his people, most outstanding one, Okoma Marama, Iborabo, Alo were diregima. Alija diregima, Alimo State diregima, ala Nigeria maragima, honorable Jogwagu shirike, honorable Bina shirike, Jere Labosa shirike, Tochukwo kereke shirike, Okahu be shirike, Engineer Benin shirike, Onyamana construction, Wokoma Dima ikaraka, Onya shiwore heborani, Etemu imarama. Wokoma de Jembo, Wokoma de Maikaraka, Quiz Popule, Ibo Felamo, Onyomana Pito, Akana Kompa, Ikaraka, Eziwa Mama, Mr. Ludiriwa, Wokome de Jemba, CEO Elizabeth Ventures, Ikaraka, Democracy Merielo, Ndime Merielo. Thank God I'm from Imo State. Emeka has come to rejuvenate Imo State. Make you jubilate, make you celebrate. Emeka Shikwen be say, this one no be say them say, Emeka has come to rejuvenate, Imo State, celebrate, make we jubilate. Ala mekele His Excellency, Achikudenwa, mekele kwa His Excellency Dr. Hakim. Kemaka Right Honorable BDK, mekele kwa Right Honorable Jones Oyereri. Ala mekele Senator Onyebuchi Mr. Empowerment. Mekele kwa Right Honorable Emeka Chinedu. Umo mimo lowali bia meziela limo. Alima de lama.
Cliffito.
Once again, for tonight's story time, I'm going to do a trigger warning. This video may contain graphic violence, descriptions, or depictions of violence. It can be triggered for individuals who have experienced violence or have been exposed to traumatic events, as well as discrimination and hate speech. Content that includes sexism, homophobia, racism, transphobia, and other forms of discrimination, which can be deeply upsetting and triggering for those who have been subjected to such attitudes and behaviors. Viewer and listener discretion is advised. This is for educational purposes only. All right. We're getting back into our book, The Nazis and the Occult. Get back to my place here. Gotta go grab something to eat really quick. I'm starving. Alright. The Louis de Wall I knew. De Wall's reputation as a formidable occultist and his own recollection of the part he played in Britain's psychic warfare against the Nazis are as fanciful as one of the popular novels with which he made his name after hostilities ended. It is clear that he reveled in a myth of his own making. For a more objective view, it is worth reading the recollections of his friend and fellow astrologer, Dr. Felix J., whose evaluation of de Wall originally appeared in Traditional Astrologer magazine. Shortly before de Wall's death, Dr. J. recalled a meeting at de Wall's apartment in Dark Lane, London, in the 1950s, during which the would-be adventurer explained the extent of his role in the British Black Ops. He explained to me that because of his intimate knowledge of the work of Hitler's astrologers and their methods, the British authorities had entrusted him to read their minds and discover what advice they would give the Fuhrer, who, he said, was totally dominated by fortune-tellers. He mentioned one astrologer in particular, Karl Ernst Kraft, whom I had never heard of at the time. The impression he conveyed to me was that he, Kraft, was hobnobbing with the general staff. Further questioning was avoided, quite properly, by reference to the Official Secrets Act. There always had been unsubstantiated rumors of Hitler's preoccupation with occultism. One such story concerned a Berlin clairvoyant named Hanussen, already fashionably years before Hitler's advent to power, who in 1933 or 1934 mysteriously disappeared. De Wall has been accused of fabricating a myth. The fact is that he did not create it, but as he did in many other respects, he probably recognized its material possibilities, and he exploited them to the full, aware of the general attitude towards astrology. I found it increasingly difficult to believe that the British High Command would consult an enemy alien astrologer. I came to the conclusion that his work lay in a different direction. Astrologically seen, too, there appeared to be a flaw in de Wall's argument, and that the methods of astrology are not as determined as those of the physical sciences. Assuming Hitler did consult astrologers, did Louis know what methods they applied? personal horoscopes of the principal military and naval chiefs engaged in the struggle were susceptible to something like a common interpretation. But what about mundane maps? Astrological charts of nations. In 1952 appeared his last book with an astrological content, The Stars of War and Peace, in which he painted a sensational picture of his astrological contribution to the British victory. This book was the culmination of a concerted effort on his part to turn whatever his secret work during the war had been into a legend, an effort that, I had heard much later, had started with a large number of syndicated articles all over the world. This legend, which proved very lucrative, has since been recognized for what it is, a carefully cultivated myth and not history. Then there's the embarrassing fact of the use of astrology for propaganda purposes during World War II, the exploitation of the bogey of Hitler's belief in the stars, the creation of the image of the evil craft, all matters known to me only years afterwards. Whether the prostitution of a science or a belief, the use of phony predictions, the adulteration of ancient material, like Nostradamus' centuries, is justifiable in war, is an ethical question which the practitioner must answer for himself. It lastly may depend on whether one believes in astrology or not. Did Louis de Waal believe in astrology? Did he regard it as an esoteric or scientific discipline? I must confess that after the end of the war, I began to doubt it. A warning to the curious. When attempting to interpret the obscure symbolism of the centuries, it is worth bearing in mind that the fifth law of prophecy, the law of diminishing accuracy, as defined by author Peter Lemessier, I don't know. The Armageddon script states that the accuracy of a prediction will diminish with time. In short, a genuine prophet who limits himself to predicting events in their own time is more likely to have their predictions fulfilled than a seer who peers into the distant future because they will not be able to understand what they are seeing. It is also a mistake to accept the visions of a symbolist such as Nostradamus at face value, as these are open to a number of equally plausible interpretations. Lemessier contends that if anyone other than a mystic of comparable intuitive ability attempts to interpret such imagery, they will encounter the second law of prophecy, that of thwarted expectation, which states that a person of lesser vision will come to the obvious conclusion, and that these will inevitably be wrong. And finally, anyone attempting to interpret predictions made by another individual or who desires to draw conclusions from an astrological chart needs to be aware of the third law, that the prejudicial interference, which makes it clear that predictions and preconceptions do not mix. Flight of fancy. Hitler's attitude towards astrology evidently hardened after Hesse's misguided peace mission to Scotland in May 1940, which saw the deputy leader of the Nazi Party ignominiously incarcerated in the British prison like a common POW. As SS Brigadefuhrer Walter Schellenberg observed in his memoirs, the great interest that Hitler had previously shown in astrology changed to uncompromising apathy following Hesse's flight. Hesse was clearly deluded and may have been suffering from an undiagnosed mental disorder, as there can be no other reason why he would get it into his head that he had been charged with a divine mission to bring peace between Britain and Germany at the very moment when the former was bracing itself for a fight for its very survival. Hitler's initial reaction at the news was to rage that his heir apparent had gone crazy. But when he had calmed down, he attributed the embarrassing episode to the advice given to Hesse by astrologers, who were suspected of being opposed to the Nazi regime. The official explanation for Hesse's irrational behavior was leaked to a Swiss correspondent of the Times, which published an item in the issue dated 14 May. Certain of Hesse's closest friends have thrown an interesting light upon the affair. They say that Hesse has always been Hitler's astrologer in secret. Up to last March, he had always predicted good fortune and had always been right. Since then, notwithstanding the victories Germany has won, he has declared that the stars showed that Hitler's meteoric career was approaching its climax. Hesse was not, as the report stated, Hitler's astrologer, but he is known to have surrounded himself with those on the fringes of occultism, the aspirations rather than the true adepts. It is likely that the idea for the ill-fated mission originated with a former mentor, Professor Karl Hochhofer, who was said to have had a vision of his people striding through the tapestried halls of English castles, bringing peace between the two great Nordic nations. Karl's son, Albrecht, was a self-proclaimed adept of astral science, an astrologer with a reputation for accuracy, and a firm believer that the rise of Hitler had been foreseen by Nostradamus. He was morally and politically opposed to the regime, and it may have been his desire to discredit the Nazi hierarchy that prompted him or his father to suggest to Hesse that he should take his chance to make peace while the planetary alignments were favorable. Ironically, it may have been Albright's ability to put a pro-Nazi spin on those same prophecies, which saved his neck when he and his father were arrested by the Gestapo a few days after the capture of the Nazis' deputy leader because, after intensive questioning, they were allowed to leave. Hitler's smoldering resentment at Hesse's betrayal prompted the latter's replacement, Martin Bormann, to issue a decree on 9th of June 1941 banning all forms of non-Aryan occultism. Aktien Hesse, as it was called, saw hundreds of occult booksellers, fortune-tellers, complementary therapists, theosophists, and the like dragged out of their beds in the early hours and interrogated by the Gestapo, who considered such people subversive and a threat to the stability of the state. Many had their books, files, and paranormal paraphernalia confiscated, but were allowed to go free after promising to cease their pagan practices. However, there were those whose answers did not satisfy their interrogators or who were suspected of having advised the traitor, and they were subsequently imprisoned or sent to a concentration camp from which they never emerged. James Bond and the Beast. The story of Rudolf Hesse's flight to Scotland reads like a chapter from a wartime thriller, and that may be attributed to the fact that it was hatched by a master of the modern spy novel, Ian Fleming, creator of James Bond. In the spring of 1941, Fleming was working for British naval intelligence, who were hatching a plan to lure a top Nazi official to Britain under false pretenses in order to prick the inflated collective Nazi ego. It was decided that Hitler's deputy, Rudolf Hess, was the most likely candidate to take the bait, as he was known to be obsessed with astrology and might be suggestible as a subject. Fleming and his Black Ops unit used an underground network of agents and sympathizers to feed back to Berlin the lie that the Duke of Hamilton and a group of British aristocrats were plotting a coup against Churchill, but first needed to negotiate a secret peace treaty with Germany. The lure was sweetened with the promise that the 11th of May 1941 was the most auspicious date for negotiations, as it saw the conjunction of 6 planets in the constellation of Taurus with the added propitious influence of a full moon. Hess would have to act while the heavens were beckoning, or miss his opportunity to ensure his place in history. Unbelievably, Hess swallowed the story hook, line, and sinker. Unfortunately for the British, however, they had landed a very odd fish indeed and decided not to exploit their great propaganda coup as much as they could have. As it seemed was non compos mentis, or as his Scottish captors would have said, 2 slices short of a loaf. Parading this wild-eyed captive in front of the newsreel camera seemed tantamount to putting a lunatic on show. The army took a few frames to prove that they had indeed captured the number 2 Nazi. Then they locked him up while they debriefed him. During the interrogation at which Ian Fleming was present, Hess was said to have spoken in an unintelligible tongue which his interrogators suspected might be esoteric in nature. According to Fleming's biographer, John Pearson, in The Life of Ian Fleming, 1966, the future author approached his immediate superior, Rear Admiral John Godfrey, and suggested that Crowley should be allowed to interview Hess about the role of the occult in Nazism. Fleming believed that Crowley might be able to press Hess to reveal the extent to which the Nazi hierarchy was under the influence of astrology, but it seems that others involved in the sting, most notably Fleming's friend, Maxwell Knight, were not happy to have such a shameless self-publicist in on the game. Pearson remarked, "For many years, Fleming had been fascinated by the legend of wickedness, which had attached itself to the name of Aleister Crowley, necromancer, black magician, and the great beast 666. This immensely ugly old diabolist and self-advertiser had thrown himself into certain more unsavory areas of the occult with a gusto that must have appealed to Fleming, and when the interrogators from British intelligence began trying to make sense of the neurotic and highly superstitious Hess, he had got the idea that Crowley might be able to help and tracked him down to a place near Torquay, where he was living harmlessly on his own and writing patriotic poetry to encourage the war effort. He seems to have had no difficulty in persuading the old gentleman to put his gifts at the disposal of the nation." Crowley corresponded with Fleming on the matter. "Sir, if it is true that Herr Hess is much influenced by astrology and magic, my services might be of use to the department in case he should not be willing to do what you wish. I have the honor to be, sir, your obedient servant, Aleister Crowley." Self-styled Beast attached a copy of his latest patriotic poem, England Stand Fast, which by all accounts had the boys of naval intelligence in stitches for days. For reasons never disclosed, this particular episode was omitted from the American edition of Fleming's biography. Undaunted by Knight's refusal to allow him access to Hess, the notorious magician offered to collaborate with intelligence to produce fake prophecies and other occult literature, to drop behind enemy lines to demoralize the, at the time, undefeated Wehrmacht. His offer was never taken up. Incidentally, Crowley also claimed the credit of creating the V for Victory sign, which was adopted by Churchill and imitated by millions of soldiers and civilians during the war as a symbol of British defiance. Crowley explained that he took it from the magical sign for the gods, Apophis and Typhoon. Or is it Typhon? I don't know. Typhon? While the equally popular thumbs up, which he also claimed to have introduced, was a magical sign for the god Kin. Crowley also took delight in impressing dinner guests with his assurance that the fastest straight arm Hitler salute also had magical associations, being taken from a Golden Dawn ritual in which it represented the adept's acknowledgement of Earth energy. It is said that when Fleming was looking to create a suitable villain for his first Bond book, Casino Royale, 1952, he recalled his encounter with Crowley. In the finished novel, Crowley character, Le Chiffre, or the Cipher, is described as very pale or white, fat, slug-like, with sadistic impulses, constantly using a Benadryl inhaler, and with an insatiable appetite for women. He also had a rather feminine mouth. One imagines that such a huge megalomaniac as Crowley would have been flattered to have been immortalized in such colorful terms. Excuse me. Hitler and the Beast. After 5 years of folly and weakness, miscalled politeness, tact, discretion, care for the feeling of others, I am weary of it. I say today, to hell with Christianity, rationalism, Buddhism, all the lumber of the centuries. I bring you a positive, impermeable fact. Magic by name, and with this I will build me a new heaven and a new earth. I want none of your faint approval or your faint dispraise. I want blasphemy, murder, rape, revolution, anything bad or good, but strong. Aleister Crowley. It is known that a German disciple of the notorious black magician Aleister Crowley sent a copy of his infamous Black Bible, the Book of the Law, to Hitler in 1925 or 1926, together with a letter urging the future Führer to adopt its credo as a loyal acolyte of the beast. Marth Kunzel believed Crowley's sex magic cult offered the means of self-realization and the awakening of the holy guardian angel, or true self, in contrast to Orthodox religion, which Crowley and his followers rejected as constricting and dogmatic. This explains Kunzel's apparently contradictory attitude to satanic magic in her advice to Hitler, as recorded by the reformed Nazi Hermann Rauschning in his reminiscence, Hitler Speaks. My Führer, don't touch black magic. As yet, both white and black are open to you, but once you've embarked on black magic, it will dominate your destiny. It will hold you captive. Don't choose the quick and easy successes. There lies before you the power of a realm over pure spirits. Do not allow yourself to be led away from your true path by earthbound spirits, which will rob you of your creative power. Crowley was later to claim that his permissive belief system, itself a corruption of Rebelli's doctrine, do what thou will, had been adopted by the Nazi leader who was in the habit of quoting key passages from the Book of the Law, specifically chapter 1, verse 44, which Hitler paraphrased as, "A new age of magic interpretation of the world is coming, of interpretation in terms of the will and not the intelligence," and again from chapter 11, verses 27 to 32, which Hitler paraphrased as, "We are now at the end of the age of reason. The intellect has grown autocratic and become a disease of life." Shortly before the outbreak of the war, Kunzel wrote to Crowley agreeing that the parallels were either a shameless still or at least an amazing coincidence, such as would occur if Hitler had tapped into the universal mind from which Crowley had taken his inspiration. It began to dawn upon me how much of Hitler's thoughts were as if they had been taken from the law of Thelema. I became his fervent admirer, and am so now, and will be to by my end. I have ever so often owned to this firm conviction that the close identity of Hitler's ideas with what the book teaches endowed me with the strength necessary for my work. I stated this even to the Gestapo some years ago. But fanciful as it might seem that anyone could believe that Hitler might have adopted Crowley's muddled, self-indulgent philosophy, if indeed one was supposed that he ate. Indeed, one was to suppose that he was even aware of Crowley's existence. There can be no denying that there are chilling parallels between Crowley's sixth form, nihilism, and the Nazi Weltanschauung worldview. Chapter 11, verse 21 of the Book of Law might have been taken directly from a speech by Hitler. "We have nothing with the outcast and unfit. Let them die in their misery. For they feel not. Compassion is the vice of kings. Stamp down the wretched and the weak. This is the law of the strong. This is our law, and the joy of the world." Conversations with the Beast. Hitler. And are you an angel of darkness? Crowley. You'll find out in good time all about me. For the present, I'll say this. If I were an angel of light, you wouldn't want to know me. Unsubstantiated conversation attributed to Hitler and Crowley from John Simmons, The Medusa's Head. Crowley's acolytes and his fiercest critics have been locked in a war of words concerning his alleged wartime activities ever since the self-styled Beast hinted he might have been playing a double game, working for the Allies as an agent while playing devil's advocate to Hitler himself. Knowing the delight Crowley took on offending the easily offended and in shamelessly lying to enhance his already considerable reputation as the wickedest man in the world, it is likely that he was the sole source of these wild and unsubstantiated yarns. The Allies would never have entrusted an incautious and irresponsible drug addict with sensitive information, while the Nazis would not have permitted such a larger-than-life character within 50 feet of their beloved Führer. This argument, however, has failed to dampen the enthusiasm of Crowley's disciples. Occult author John Simmons has the self-styled Laird of Boleskine musing on his tête-à-tête with the Führer in his fictional biography of The Beast, The Medusa's Head. I never met someone as demonic as Herr Hitler. It is as if God said, let mankind learn a lesson. They need to open their eyes a little wider. Hitler will do that for them. Just wait. They will see things that men have never seen or heard before. Such horrors that there will be no word in the German or any other language to describe them. That is what the demonic is when it appears in a very ordinary person, a man of the people, someone the intellectuals are contemptuous of, but not the masses. With an uncanny instinct, they know who he is. Those who believe that Hitler was a genuine black magician cite the scale of the genocide he perpetrated as evidence that he was making a sacrifice to the old gods, just as the Sumerians had done millennia before. Hitler had made it known that he felt cheated of his war by the Munich Agreement of September 1938, which gave him the Sudetenland and Czechoslovakian in return for more empty assurances, which suggests there was a satanic promise to be fulfilled rather than a political agenda. When Britain and France finally declared war on Germany in September 1940, the sky burned blood-red over Berchtesgaden. All who witnessed it agreed that it was an evil portent for Germany. Psychic self-defense. While Crowley was offering his services to British intelligence, or so he claimed, another English occultist was doing her bit for Britain on a higher plane. In 1940, Dion Fortune, an initiate of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, presided over a magic circle in the mist-shrouded town of Glastonbury, the heart of Arthurian England. Every Sunday lunchtime, they would sit in a circle and visualize national archetypes who would come to the aid of the nation to strengthen morale and meddle with Hitler's mind. Their energy was supplemented by emanations from members of the public who were invited to attend in spirit. Whether King Arthur, Merlin, and St. George were successfully invoked, no one knows, but Fortune was confident that her group had attributed to Hitler's decision to postpone Operation Sea Lion, the seaborne invasion of Britain. King of the Witches. About the same time as Fortune was encouraging her followers to assist the few during the summer of 1940, Gerald Gardner, the self-styled King of the Witches, and a close friend of Crowley, convened his coven at the sacred Rufus Stone in the New Forest to perform a rite of ceremonial magic. Its purpose was to erect a protective cone of astral light around the embattled British Isles. It was not the first time such a rite had been performed. According to Gardner, his pagan predecessors had fended off both Napoleon and the Spanish Armada, using the same spells. Traditionally, a sacrifice was required to make the work potent, but the aging participants lacked the heart for a blood offering, so it was decided one of their number should perform the ritual skyclad, meaning naked, while the remainder stripped off and covered themselves in grease to protect themselves from the chill night air. The idea was that the unprotected soul would be expected to catch a cold and die of natural causes, thus saving the coven from the unwanted attentions of the British Bobby. But being elderly, not one but two succumbed and died within days. Mad though they might have been, it is a fact that shortly thereafter Hitler abandoned his plans to invade Britain and turned his attention eastwards instead. Burn, witch, burn. A year later in Ashdown Forest, Sussex, Crowley was putting his considerable knowledge of magic and showmanship into practice. He had invited a group of acolytes to the woods and formed them into two circles, one within the other. In the center sat an effigy of Hitler dressed in Nazi uniform. Crowley's coven were evidently in deadly earnest, as they were all attired in ceremonial robes, embossed with runic symbols like extras in a Hammer horror film. The members circled the dummy. They intoned the barbarous words of power to bind the effigy with its mortal counterpart across the channel. Then came the climax of the affair, when the dummy was fitted with wings, hoisted to the top of a local church and set ablaze. Before the spire could catch a light, it was cut free and launched towards Berlin. Himmler's pet astrologer. Among the ragged collective of soothsayers, palmists, and wild-eyed prophets netted by the Gestapo and thrown into Volksbüttel concentration camp in the wake of Aktion Hess, was an ex-member of the Berlin Physics Group, or Psychics Group, the Swastika Circle, with a reputation for uncannily accurate astrological forecasts and a compulsion to caricature those he despised. In the summer of 1923, Wilhelm Wolff had plotted the charts of Hitler, Göring, and SA leader Ernst Röhm, and warned all who would listen that if they hitched their star to that of the future Führer, they would share his fate. Hitler said Wolff was destined to be feared and to issue cruel and senseless orders, which would lead to his self-destruction shortly before May 1945. History proved him to be correct. Röhm was slain in a bloody purge of the SA leadership known as the Night of the Long Knives in 1934. Hitler was to commit suicide in the bunker beneath Berlin on 30th of April, and Göring cheated the hangman by swallowing cyanide in his cell in Nuremberg in 1945. Of course, it did not take a seer to foretell that Hitler's gang were likely to invoke the old adage forecasting disaster for those who lived by the sword, but Wolff was fairly specific regarding dates, particularly those relating to the various attempts that would be made on the Führer's life and his numerous psychosomatic disorders. Pendulum and Pentagram. On his release from the Volksbüttel in March 1942, Wolff was instructed to report to an ultra-secret institute attached to the naval headquarters in Berlin, where he was to be employed as a research assistant. However, on his arrival, he was shocked to learn the real nature of his department and the duties he was expected to perform. The National Socialist leaders proposed to use these research centers to harness not only natural but supernatural forces. All intellectual, natural, and supernatural sources of power, from modern technology to medieval black magic, and the teaching of Pythagoras to the Faustian pentagram incantation, were to be exploited in the interest of final victory. This occult think tank was run by a naval officer who must have been tempted to put in for a transfer to the Russian front when he found he was overseeing the activities of the spiritualist mediums, pendulum practitioners, astrologers, and sensitives, all of whom had their gifts put to practical use in the service of the Reich. Seers were put to work divining the location of Allied shipping, using little more than a pendulum suspended over a chart of the Atlantic. The results were, of course, pitiful. Wolf recalled betraying a hint of snobbery and the belief that his rivals were no match for esoteric astrology. Whatever one may think about occult phenomenon, it was simply ridiculous to expect that an unknown world could be forcibly opened up in this dilettante fashion and exploited for military purposes. Even in those cases where there was some initial success, no attempt was made to evaluate the findings by systematic scientific procedures. The most convincing evidence for the efficacy of divination had been made the previous year by a 60-year-old retired architect by the name of Ludwig Straniek, who told his superiors that if he were to be shown a photograph of a ship, he could pinpoint its position on a map with his pendulum. Their incredulity evaporated when he successfully located both the Bismarck and the Prinz Eugene, ships which the British had been hunting unsuccessfully for months. However, even that remarkable achievement wasn't sufficient to convince the skeptical military minds that Straniek would be an asset to the Reich. Back at the Naval Institute, he was presented with a unique test. A lump of metal was placed on a large piece of paper and then removed. Straniek was then brought into the room and asked to scan the paper with his pendulum and state where the metal had been. Again, he was successful. Unfortunately, those in charge did not understand the nature of psychic sensitivity and put enormous pressure on Straniek and his colleagues to produce results on which the U-boat wolfpacks could act. Inevitably, the group members succumbed to the stress of having to prove themselves day after day, and their potency declined rapidly as if their psychic batteries were being drained. Straniek's health deteriorated and his colleagues were dismissed. The Institute returned to conventional scientific experiments. Ironically, German naval intelligence had been keen to preserve with the Occult Bureau in the belief that the British were doing the same. How else could they account for Allied success in tracking and sinking so many U-boats? In fact, although the Allies were experimenting with similar techniques, their success was purely due to them having cracked the German secret code, a fact that remained unknown to the enemy until long after the war. Despite the obvious lack of enthusiasm for Project Pendulum, Wolf's paymasters were sufficiently impressed with his esoteric credentials and his accuracy to commission him to devise a Zen Buddhist-style psychic brainwashing program to harden the German soldier in mind and body in preparation for the privations he was expected to endure during the invasion of Russia later that same year, and to instill in each man the need for self-sacrifice. They were convinced that the Japanese had instilled fanatical zeal in their soldiers by a combination of psychological indoctrination and drugs, and they were seriously considering conditioning the SS troops in the same way. No one knows if Wolf did as he was asked, but it is a fact that the SS spearhead earned a reputation for almost suicidal self-sacrifice during their initial assault on Russia that autumn. The Buddha of Berlin. It was his activities at the Naval Institute which brought him, one crisp winter's evening in 1942, to the attention of Himmler's monsieur and personal physician Felix Kirsten, a grotesquely corpulent, waxy-skinned man with greedy eyes and grasping hands. If Wolf's description is to be believed, Kirsten was an obvious quack, but he had wallowed in the shallows of pseudoscience long enough to distinguish a serious astrologer from a common fortune teller. In his elegant apartment on the Rudsheimer Platz in Berlin, forcibly acquired from its former owner, Kirsten squatted like a sullen Buddha and inquired what conclusions Wolf had drawn from Hitler's horoscope. As the astrologer was later to claim in his autobiography, Zodiac and Swastika, he pointed out certain ominous alignments. I then suggested that a man like Hitler could not be successful as a national leader for long. saw bitter events which were bound to occur unless there was a radical change of policy. At that time, the Moscow and Leningrad offensive had been broken off, and our troops were engaged in strategic withdrawals, which were actually to last 3 long years. I told Kirsten that Hitler had the same Saturn position in his natal chart as Napoleon, and that, although their destinies were not identical, there were certain parallels, applying primarily to Germany's Russian campaign and the battles still to come. Wolf suggested that if Germany were to be saved from total defeat and destruction, something would have to be done soon, and implied that Kirsten took the hint. I then went on to say that my negative forecast for Hitler's personal future was borne out by mundane horoscopes, especially the horoscope for Germany and the chart for January 30th, 1933, i.e. the founding of the Third Reich. Kirsten appears to have taken his guest's assessment seriously. Wolf had singled himself out by his mastery of sidereal astrology, a more esoteric branch of the art which had originated in India thousands of years earlier, and which was considered to be far more accurate than the Western system, as it is based on the precise position of the planets and the luminaries in relation to the ecliptic, the great circle on the celestial sphere representing the annual path of the sun, rather than the tropical, either of the 2 parallel circles on the celestial sphere having the same latitudes and names as the corresponding lines on Earth, as is the case in Western astrology. More significantly, this Hindu tradition did not contradict Nazi ideology, which refused to admit that an Aryan and an Untermensch, racially inferior individual, could share the same destiny. In order to study the system, Wolf had acquired a working knowledge of Sanskrit, which impressed Kirsten, the would-be mystic, but Kirsten jealously guarded his access to Himmler and was not willing to relinquish his place at the trough. In order to ensure Wolf's subservience and gratitude, Kirsten set himself up as Wolf's sponsor, commissioning projections for the SS Inner Circle, which he would insist on approving before presenting at an opportune moment to the Reichsfuhrer SS. Dining with the Devil. Wolf might have remained an obscure minor figure in the Nazi psychological war machine had he not contributed to the audacious rescue of Hitler's closest ally, Benito Mussolini. The Italian dictator had been deposed by rivals in the fascist Grand Council on 24 July 1943 and imprisoned on the island of Panza, less than 75 miles southeast of Rome, by supporters of his successor, Marshal Badoglio. Within days, Himmler ordered the SS intelligence service to locate Mussolini using every variety of occult science at their disposal. This prompted the Gestapo to round up the most reliable astrologers and radiothesis, pendulum diviners, in the Reich for a top-secret summit at Wannsee, where they were plied with food and drink and ordered to identify the location within 24 hours, or face the consequences. Wolf offered a different version of these events in his autobiography. He claimed to have been the only astrologer to have been consulted and added that he produced the required answer within hours. However, before Mussolini could be rescued, he was moved to a mountain prison in Gran Sasso, from which he was later liberated by German paratroopers. However, the truth of the matter, Wolf's contribution had been duly noted, and, as a reward for his services, he received a personal invitation to dine with SS General Arthur Neb, the Kaiserhof Hotel in Berlin. While most of the civilian population of war-torn Europe scavenged for scraps, Neb and his guests gorged themselves on cognac and American cigarettes until the topic of conversation turned to great men and their horoscopes. Wolf tactlessly remarked that, according to his calculations, Adolf Hitler would share the same destiny as Napoleon, Cromwell, and Wallenstein, the 17th century German general and statesman, but Neb let the prediction pass, possibly because he shared Wolf's vision of the future. Before he could take Wolf into his confidence, Neb put him to the test by presenting him with 2 sets of anonymous biographies, from which he was to sketch a basic chart on the spot. The first was said to be that of a criminal and the second a spy. In fact, they were for Neb and his sidekick, Loeb. Summing up the prospects of the man designated as the spy, Wolf remarked that he had moderate gifts as a detective, which must have amused his host, but his prognosis for the criminal left Neb visibly shaken. "You don't need to bother too much about this man," Wolf told him. "He'll soon fall into the hands of the criminal Polozzi and will come to a violent end." Unbeknown to Wolf, Neb had in fact been playing a double game, working secretly with the July plotters, presumably in the hope of saving his own skin by joining the anti-Hitler faction before the Allies could win the war and put him on trial. When the assassination attempt failed, the SS rounded up conspirators and executed them by hanging them from meat hooks with piano wire wound round their necks. Neb managed to evade capture for months, but was eventually betrayed and executed by his own men, just as Wolf predicted on the 4th of March 1945. Having passed the test, Wolf left his host later that evening with orders to produce detailed charts and analysis for 24 high-ranking Nazi officials who were suspected of corruption. He had entered the Serpent's Lair. Alright, so we're going to leave it right there and go to our second music break. Let's see. On this music break, we have Hosny Bronx, Free Child, King Cinnamon with Rosie, and Hosny Bronx once again with Strong Life. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this music break.
I am a child of one. yeah, it's funky on the beats.
Suck my boost, you got my body loose. Anytime you talk me, you got me confused. Suck my boost, you got my body loose. Anytime you talk me, you got me confused. Cinnamon, cinnamon, do it softly. I said you wine your body, eat the sweetie, sweetie. Make it rock my body, I am feeling horny. Make it touch my body, I am feeling sweetie. Suck my boost, you got my body loose. Anytime you talk me, you got me confused. Suck my boost, you got my body loose. Anytime you talk me, you got me confused. All my men, they wear out. All my guys, they wear out. Imarama, Imarama, Rosie. Imarama, Imarama, Rosie. All my men, they wear out. All my guys, they wear out. Imarama, Imarama, Rosie. Imarama, Imarama, Rosie. Mukomukeji, go bere muketa. Oya mukomukeji, oya bere muketa. Daddy mu ekon, omo ni pe mukeji. Daddy bere muketa, omo ni fún mi lẹ́yìn. Daddy fisi fisi, omo ni ẹjọ. Daddy saucy saucy, omo ni ẹjọ. Daddy kosi kosi, omo ni ẹjọ. Daddy trying pussy, omo ni ẹjọ. Daddy and his baby, them dey for corner. Daddy begin the touch and the girl dey holla. Now daddy begin the open the shirt collar. Now something come out. Daddy begin the suck am. Daddy mu ekon, omo ni pe mukeji. Daddy bere muketa, omo ni fún mi lẹ́yìn. Daddy fisi fisi, omo ni ẹjọ. Daddy saucy saucy, omo ni ẹjọ ẹjọ. All my men they wear out. All my guys they wear out. Imarama, Imarama, Rosie. Imarama, Imarama, Rosie. All my men they wear out. All my guys they wear out. Imarama, Imarama, Rosie. Imarama, Imarama, Rosie. Suck my boost, you got my body loose. Anytime you talk me, you got me confused. Suck my boost, you got my body loose. Anytime you talk me, you got me confused. Cinnamon, cinnamon, do it softly. I see the wine your body, eat the sweetie, sweetie. Make it rock my body, I am feeling horny. Make it touch my body, I am feeling sweetie. Suck my boost, you got my body loose. Anytime you talk me, you got me confused. Suck my boost, you got my body loose. Anytime you talk me, you got me confused. Kissy, kissy, amani, ejo. Daddy saucy, saucy, amani, ejo. Daddy kosi, kosi, amani, ejo. Daddy kahe kosi, amani, ejo. Daddy contact, amani, ejo. Daddy comfort, daddy consist, amani, ejo. Daddy can't eat, daddy 120, amani, ejo. Daddy 18, daddy 240, amani, ejo. Daddy 360. Daddy and the baby, them there for corner. Daddy begin the touch and the girl they holla. Daddy begin the open the shirt collar. Something come out. Daddy begin the sucker. Daddy move echo, omo ni pe mukeji. Daddy bere muketa, omo ni fún mi lẹ́yìn. Daddy fisi fisi, omo ni ẹjọ. Daddy saucy saucy, omo ni ẹjọ ẹjọ. All my men they wear out. All my guys they wear out. Imarama, 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 Imarama.
Oh yeah, it's funky on the beats.
Babylon make you suffer. What you desire, young life. We are ready to fight. Hard life for my people. I don't know why my people live this life. I don't know why my people live this life. I don't know how to fight, 'cause my people suffer. Whoa, whoa, whoa. What do you want, Babylon? I don't understand why this world is so strange, strange with my people. I don't know how to fight, but if we are together, it will work. It will work. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Babylon no have no heart. 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 My people, you have to survive. Yeah, you must rebuild you and make your own way. You must not give up. The beginning of the revolt will start. We need to follow our true destiny. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Yeah, 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 yeah. I don't know why my people live this life. I don't know why my people live this life. The obstacle we face, yeah, is Babylon. The world is a good place, yeah, for our freedom. You take everything, you don't breathe anything, yeah, yeah. Young life, all anti-dread. We must believe in a magical, powerful force that unite us, and not just these people stay speechless again. We don't want to talk, no, it's time to fight, yeah. We stop talking. Babylon make you suffer. 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 What you desire, young life. We are ready to fight.
Welcome back, and thanks so much for joining me tonight on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. This evening we have been reading The Nazis and the Occult, the Dark Forces Unleashed by the Third Reich. And this was written by Paul Roland. But, yeah, at the beginning of each I don't want to say stasis of the show or section of the show, I'm showing this trigger warning because I don't want YouTube to get rid of my videos, my live feed as well. So, trigger warning, this video may contain graphic violence, descriptions or depictions of violence, Violence can be triggering for individuals who have experienced violence or have been exposed to traumatic events, as well as discrimination and hate speech. That includes racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and other forms of discrimination can be deeply upsetting and triggering for those who have been subjected to such attitudes and behaviors. Viewer discretion and listener discretion is advised, and this is for educational purposes only. Because if we don't learn from our history, we're doomed to repeat it. I truly believe that. Alright, so let's get back into our hit. Alrighty. Alright. Meeting Himmler. In the spring of 1944, Wolf penetrated deeper into the shadowy world of the Reichsfuhrer SS when he encountered Himmler's trusted lieutenant, Walter Schellenberg, the shy, softly-spoken officer in charge of counter-espionage at the Reich Central Security Office. If the astrologer's account is to be believed, Schellenberg quizzed Wolf on the more questionable aspects of astrology, and having satisfied himself on his account, shared his most intimate thoughts concerning the forced removal of Hitler from his office and from this earth. Wolf replied, unfortunately, Hitler's removal would not change the course of events. Far too much has happened for that. I have been studying Hitler's horoscope for 20 years now. I have a pretty clear idea of what is ultimately in store for him. He will probably die under the hand of an assassin, certainly Neptunian. That is enigmatic. Circumstances in which a woman will play a leading part. The world will probably never know the precise details of his death, for in Hitler's horoscope, Neptune has long been in bad aspect to other planets. Moreover, Neptune is extremely strong in his horoscope, and it was always to be expected that his great military projects would have a dubious outcome. Wolf concluded that the astrological prospects of Britain and America were extremely adventurous at the moment and would peak in mid-May 1945. Action would have to be taken, he said, if Germany was to avoid greater misfortunes. Unbeknown to Wolf, Himmler was already planning the downfall of his Führer, but he was crippled by indecision and doubt. The only thing that might persuade him to act on his daydreams was a favorable sign from the stars. News of Wolf's intimate conversations with Neb and Schellenberg reached him at a critical time, and he issued a summons for the astrologer to be brought to him at Bergwald, his own private castle at Aachen near Salzburg. Himmler was then on a fatless and meatless diet due to a digestive disorder. But as he and Wolf exchanged pleasantries at the luncheon table, the Reichsfuhrer confessed that he hated the sight of blood and could not bear to witness the suffering of an animal. Those words seem obscene, coming from the man who was directly responsible for the cold-blooded butchery of millions of innocent men, women, and children. Wolf noted that Himmler had a pallid complexion and red eyelids, indicative of overwork, and a cruel, cynical mouth, although he had greeted his guest cordially and appeared to enjoy conversation as long as the subject was to his liking. After lunch, Wolf was invited to a private audience with Himmler in his large but sparsely furnished study, overlooking the groups framed by the lilac-blue mountains of Oberschlosberg. The Reichsfuhrer began by enthusing on astrology and occult matters, confining to his guest that he was in the habit of consulting a lunar calendar before embarking on important projects. He also defended the recently implemented policy which forbade anyone to practice astrology without the regime approval. For this, Wolf attempted to make the distinction between astrology and fortune-telling, but Himmler proved both opinionated and inflexible. The Reichsfuhrer explained, They base their attitude on the fact that astrology, as a universalist doctrine, is diametrically opposed to our own philosophical view of the world. Astrologers claim to be able to cast horoscopes for the entire globe, for the whole of humanity, but it is precisely this that we, National Socialists and SS members, are obliged to reject out of hand. A doctrine which is meant to apply in equal measure to Negroes, Indians, Chinese, and Aryans is in crass opposition to our conception of the racial soul. Each one of the peoples I have named has its own specific racial soul, just as we have ours, and consequently, no doctrine can cover all cases. It was clear from the technical terms Himmler dropped into their conversation that he possessed a working knowledge of astrology and was familiar with astrological expressions, such as trine aspects, positive and negative signs, and the elevation of planets. He was acquainted with the fundamental principles of a horoscope. Wolff observed and knew only to apply them, but Wolff was struck by Himmler's political naivety and the shallowness of his personality. He asked me the strangest and most infantile questions in his quest for astrological enlightenment about the military and political situation. God knows Himmler was no genius, rather he was a mediocrity, especially when you saw him in private. He was a pettifogging bureaucrat with scruples. As Hitler's thousand-year Reich neared its own Dämmerung, Himmler came to rely more and more on his pet astrologer, having convinced himself that Wolff possessed a genuine gift for prophecy. On the 9th of December 1944, the Reichsfuhrer had narrowly escaped death, as Wolff had predicted he would on that day. It's a strange thought, isn't it? Herr Wolff, said Himmler, breaking off from a disclosure on the subject of loyalty and honor, which he considered uniquely German qualities, that on December 9th I actually had an accident which might well have proven fatal. I was driving at night and 130 feet above the Black Forest Railway. I ran off the road and down the hill onto the tracks, just as a train was approaching. We only just managed to get out of the way in time. The accuracy of your horoscope is phenomenal. During these last months of the war, as the Allies encircled the demoralized remnants of the German army, the Reichsfuhrer repeatedly turned in desperation to Wolff and demanded to know what options the stars offered for his survival. Wolff dutifully consulted the natal charts of those involved on both sides and, armed with requisite data, urged Himmler to have the courage of his convictions and act to overthrow Hitler, as Schellenberg and Kirsten had been arguing him to do for months. But yet again, Himmler's dithering and indecisiveness proved his undoing. By the time he had finally committed himself to a plan, all escape routes had been cut off. On 21 May 1945, he was captured by the British disguised as a military policeman and, while in custody, committed suicide by swallowing cyanide. The best Wolff could say of Himmler, one of the most feared and hated men in history, was that he was true to his flag and his oath of allegiance to his leader. His only other saving grace was economy. When it came to finances, he balanced his books down to the last pfennig. Hitler and astrology. The smokescreen of propaganda and popular myth was obscured and has obscured the true extent to which the Nazi hierarchy were obsessed with astrology and dependent upon their seers for advice. Hitler could be said to have had an ambivalent attitude towards the subject. He approved of it when it appeared to endorse his plans, but dismissed it out of hand when it contradicted his own instincts. He appears to have professed a passing interest mainly to appease Himmler, who refused to make a single significant decision without recourse to his own personal astrological advisor. But the Führer distrusted anyone who relied on the stars to dictate their destiny. After the war, his private secretary, Fräulein Schroeder, attempted to downplay the Führer's reported obsession with the stars. She told journalist A. Zoller, author of Hitler Private, 1949. There were popular rumors that Hitler allowed himself to be guided by astrologers before reaching any important decision. I must confess that I never noticed anything of the kind, and the subject was never mentioned in conversation. On the contrary, Hitler refuted this by his firmly held conviction that people born on the same day, at the same place, and at the same hour in no way had the same fate. For this viewpoint, he thought that twins provided the best evidence. He always vigorously rejected the proposition that the fate of individuals depends upon the stars and their constellations. This view had been contradicted by Himmler, who told Wolff, "We cannot permit any astrologers to follow their calling except those who are working for us. In the National Socialist state, astrology must remain a privilegium singulorum. It is not for the broad masses." By this, it is understood, he was making a distinction between those who practiced the esoteric science of astrology in service to the state and common fortune tellers. While Hitler may have been inclined to consult astrologers before making a major decision, at least before he began to believe in his own infallibility, for his loyal lieutenant Heinrich Himmler, astrology was the guiding principle of life. His dependency on portents and prophecies was a source of wry amusement among the more skeptical members of the regime. Hitler's blue-eyed protege, Reinhard Heydrich, once summed it up by saying, "Göring is worried about the stars on his chest, Himmler about those in his horoscope." Adolf Hitler's dream. Hitler may not have been a fervent believer in astrology, but he was extremely superstitious by nature. Prophetic dream during the First World War, which saved him from almost certain death, was only one of several incidents which convinced the Führer that his life was protected by Providence, and that it confirmed he had a divine mission to fulfill. During a lull in the fighting on the Western Front in 1917, Corporal Hitler, a runner in the Bavarian infantry, fell asleep at his post. Minutes later, he awoke in a distressed state, having just dreamt that he had been buried alive after a shell had exploded in the trench. He scrambled to his feet, clutching at his chest, which had been hit by smoldering shrapnel in the dream. When he finally came to his senses and saw that he was actually unharmed, he became aware that his comrades were also unhurt and had returned to cleaning their weapons and playing cards, having shrugged off Hitler's panic as just another case of battle fatigue. It was then that he felt compelled to leave the dugout and venture out across no man's land, at the risk of being shot by an enemy sniper. At the moment, he realized the great danger in which he had put himself. A roaring sound overhead, made him throw himself instinctively into a shell crater. Then a tremendous explosion shook the ground, showering him with mud and debris. When he finally recovered his nerve, he scrambled back to the trench where he found his dead comrades buried under mounds of earth and shattered metal, just as he had foreseen in his dream. Hitler was the sole survivor. In another incident, which happened many years later, in October 1933, Hitler was delighted to be invited to lay the foundation stone of the House of German Art in Munich, which had been designed by his close personal friend, Paul Ludwig Troost. However, when Hitler struck the stone at the dedication ceremony, the hammer shattered in his hand. For months afterwards, he brooded on what had happened, and he considered it to be an ill omen. It was only when Troost fell seriously ill and later died in January 1934 that Hitler felt that the black cloud had been lifted from around his head. "When the hammer shattered, I knew at once it was an evil omen," he told his architect, Albert Speer. "Something is going to happen," I thought. Now we know why the hammer broke. The architect was destined to die. Occult science. In their vain quest to prove the superiority of the Aryan master race, the Nazis distorted the esoteric teachings of Theosophists, perverted Christian doctrine, and subverted the laws of science. Undesirables were put to death under the guise of natural selection. SS stud farms were established for selective breeding, and fruitless expeditions were funded to prove crackpot theories. The Nazis succeeded in their plans for world domination. They would have plunged the world into a new dark age of ignorance, superstition, and unprecedented barbarity. The Nazis believed that if they captured the spiritual center of a country, their enemy would lose their will to resist and capitulate. The same would be true if its symbols of power were taken, its regimental flags, icons of cultural identity, and crown jewels. The enemy would sense that its national identity had been lost and its morale would crumble. So, from Vienna, they looted the Habsburg crown jewels. From Prague, they stole the treasure of the Bohemian kings, while Warsaw lost the Polish royal regalia to the Reich. In his defense, Hitler cried and cited the precedent established by the Emperor Napoleon and by the British, who had presented the sacred Koh-i-Noor diamond to Queen Victoria, for whom it was no more than a very expensive bauble. Hitler had been a vociferous critic of the monarchy and the aristocracy, which he derided as a classic example of the laws of selective breeding operating in reverse. Royal families became more degenerate with each generation, he asserted, until their members succumbed to insanity. Nature argued Hitler supported his belief in the Führer principle, the ascension of those who had proven their fitness to rule. For this reason, he regarded the emblems of royalty with disdain, but he understood their symbolic value, conferring power and authority to those courageous enough to claim them. Sacred sites. The origin of the Nazi belief that each nation possesses a sacred center and that it possesses it is to subjugate its people was a distortion of the laws of the esoteric science of geomancy. The ancients believed that certain locations were sources of psychic energy, and that this force could be drawn upon for communicating with the forces of nature and the gods. For this reason, they built their megalithic monuments and temples over underground streams, near natural magnetic fields, or at the point of converging ley lines, all of which could be divined by the community's priests and shamans. The practice extended across Europe, India, and Asia. Ancient Chinese, for example, adopted the idea in their development of acupuncture, which operates on the principle that the human body too has a network of invisible energy lines that can be mapped and the flow of etheric energy unblocked or diverted by the insertion of needles at key points. The Nazi fascination with sacred sites can be traced back to the theories of a British antiquarian, William Henry Black, who in 1870 first proposed the idea that many of the world's ancient monuments conform to a grand geometrical pattern, perhaps coincidentally rather than by design. However, the fact that these sacred stone circles and temples were located at the focal point of a natural energy source suggested that early civilizations and communities may not have been as primitive as 19th century science had assumed they were. Between the wars, the idea found enthusiastic support among amateur antiquarians in Germany, who discovered that the distances between many monolithic structures revealed that their ancestors possessed a remarkably sophisticated understanding of mathematics and astronomy. Wilbert Kerfel's The Cosmetology of Indies argued convincingly that Aryan tribes in India had developed a complex cosmology, which they had documented in stone at their most sacred sites. The following year, Otto Ruder galvanized the German academic establishment with the riddle of the Edda, which legitimized the beliefs of the eccentric Volkisch occultists by demonstrating that there may have been a historic basis for the Norse myths. Ruder argued that there was a hitherto unknown Indo-European culture which had encoded their knowledge of the constellations in their creation myths. Then in 1929, Wilhelm Todt published his exhaustive subject of the study, Ancient German Sanctuaries, drawing on years of painstaking research and thousands of detailed measurements, which he had personally made at sites throughout Germany. He claimed to have identified a national astronomical cult based on extensive scientific foundations, which cemented the growing belief among mystically minded German nationalists that the Aryans were far more civilized than their non-Aryan counterparts in Africa and elsewhere. Twitt wrote, "We have to unlearn our belief that the Roman Church under the Frankish Emperor Charles brought civilization to the barbaric tribes of Germany. The old picture of our ancestors' primitive and incomprehensible customs, stunted, defiant, and wild figures, raged scanty clothing of badly worked skins. Gives way to familiar solemn scanty clothing of badly worked skins, gives way to familiar solemn behavior, the well cared for appearance of people at a fete, and elegant properly made outfits including well-tailored linen, woolen, and hempen cloth, sumptuous furs, rich jewelry of gold, silver, and amber and bronze, lively, expressive, melodious singing from which our best and our most familiar folk songs come down to us, accompanied by technically accomplished, sweet-sounding instruments. In such innocence, the idealism, the myth of the master race, began to take shape, supported by the auspicious new science of eugenics, selective breeding." Oh, poppycock. I just took a drink and spilled it on me. I think this is a V. Like, these titles on, they're not chapters, but they're sections of the chapter. I think it's like Old English letters or whatever, so some letters are hard to read, but I think it says Vril Power. All right, let's see. In the 1920s, Joseph Heinz, a lawyer from Westphalia, discovered that many of the major ley lines around the world originated under mountains and hills that had been deemed sacred as the dwelling places of the gods. Such sites were said to be sources of an all-powerful natural energy which could be harnessed by magical means. Legend had it that the pagan priests of ancient Britain used it to reduce their enemies to ashes, which led to it being known as the Lightning of Druids. The Nazi mystics renamed it Vril, adopting the name from The Coming Rays, a novel by the British occult author and adept Bulwer Lytton. Indeed, the force itself was not. That seems an entirely fictional creation. During the same decade that Heinz was tracing the source of the ley lines, two scientists from Stuttgart were attempting to find a common factor linking cases of cancer in the city. H. Windsor and W. Melzer thought that there might be a geological basis for instances of disease, but come on, book. Could find no cases of cancer in the city, and could find nothing until dowsers demonstrated that the cases were clustered around the region's 5 major underground fault lines. When Nazi scientists were commissioned to follow up this research, they discovered that the velocity of the radiation that they detected by dowsing traveled at a median rate of 44 meters per second, which was the same number as the Germanic geomantic measure, the Rast. It appeared that there might be a link between the magnetic radiation emitted by the Earth at ancient sacred sites and the standard unit of measurement used by the ancient astronomical cults in the construction of their sacred sites. The potential power to be unleashed by those who desire to focus such a force can be gleaned from the description given in 1895 by A.P. Smith, a member of the London Theosophical Society, whose members were fervent believers in the existence of such forces. There are great etheric currents sweeping over the surface of the earth from pole to pole in volume, which makes their power as irresistible as the rising tide. And there are methods by which this stupendous force may be safely utilized, though skillful attempts to control it would be fraught with frightful danger. When Heinrich Himmler learned of such a force, he determined that Germany would be the first to control it, and if the Nazis were to be judged by their deeds, it was clear it would not be used for the benefit of humanity. I shall construct an observatory in which will be a represented of the three great cosmological conceptions of history, those of Ptolemy, Copernicus, and Horbiger. Was by Adolf Hitler, 28 April 1942. The world of ice. While geomancy continues to stimulate serious discussions in the 21st century as part of the New Age sciences, its more bizarre companions, the world ice theory and the hollow earth, elicit nothing but derision. But during the Hitler years and the vacuum created by the defection of Einstein and the intellectual elite, they threatened to supplant mainstream science in the Nazi state. Practitioners of esoteric disciplines, from Ayurveda and to Zen, have a saying, like attracts like, which they cite as one of the universal laws. It means that like-minded souls attract those who will aid them in their spiritual development, while those with a dark purpose will gravitate towards others of a similar nature. It was certainly true of the Nazis, who attracted the scientists and philosophers they deserved, cranks and oddballs with the most outlandish theories imaginable. Austrian engineer Hans Horbiger, 1860 to 1931, was typical of the eccentric pseudoscientists who were sponsored by the state, and in turn he learned from them the power of threats and intimidation. In 1925, he recruited Nazi thugs to disrupt meetings and lectures held by orthodox physicists, and he wrote threatening letters to the scientific publications and academics who disagreed with him. "The time has come for you to choose," he wrote, "whether to be with us or against us. While Hitler is cleaning up politics, Hans Horbiger will sweep the bogus sciences out of the way. The doctrine of eternal ice will be a sign of the regeneration of the German people. Watch out, come over to our side before it's too late." Core of Horbiger's theory was that the solar system was formed millions of years ago, when a massive block of ice collided with the sun. The resulting explosion threw molten matter into space, which eventually cooled to form the planets. He had come to this conclusion after witnessing the violent reaction caused by molten metal being poured onto the snow in the foundry where he had worked. According to Horbiger, this cosmic accident accounted for the existence of the poles and the Great Flood, which was mythologized in the Bible and the Nordic legends of Edda. But what really intrigued the mystically minded Nazis was the idea that the Balthasar world ice theory offered a scientific basis for their belief in an antediluvian age of supermen, which its proponent explained had been made possible by gravitational changes caused by one of the three moons orbiting the Earth. Its increasing proximity resulted in a mutant race of giants who were rendered almost extinct when the full moon finally collided with our planet. 150,000 years ago, leaving their humanoid slaves scavenging for survival. The few remaining giants established several advanced civilizations, including the islands of Atlantis, the Lemurian for the superior race of human beings, with the Aryans, whom they nurtured as their successors, for being hunted down by their vengeful slaves, giving rise to the myths and legends of gods and heroes, with which we are familiar today. It only remained for the Nazis to implement a selective breeding program from pure Aryan stock to regenerate the race of Aryan supermen and restore them to their rightful place as rulers of the earth. However, it was never satisfactorily explained how the regular-sized Aryans had inherited the blood from their oversized mentors. When challenged to explain this and the other glaring anomalies in his cosmology by practitioners of Jewish liberal science, i.e., conventional science, such as the fact that the light reflective capacity of the moon is lower than that of ice, Horbiger had a typical Nazi retort. Trust me, not equations. When will you learn that mathematics is valueless? It's not known when Hitler was converted to Horbiger's Aryan fantasy, but there's evidence that he was willing to act upon it. He is reputed to have said in January 1942, "Nothing prevents us from supposing that mythology is a reflection of things that have existed and of which humanity has retained a vague memory. In all the human traditions, whether oral or written, one finds mention of a huge cosmic disaster. What the Bible tells on the subject is not peculiar to the Jews, but was certainly borrowed by them from the Babylonians and Assyrians. In the Nordic legend, we read of a struggle between gods and giants. The thing is only explicable upon the hypothesis of a disaster that completely destroyed a humanity which already possessed a high degree of civilization. The fragments of our prehistory are perhaps merely reproductions of objects belonging to a more distant past. What proof have we that besides objects made of stone, there were not similar objects made of metal? The life of bronze is limited. Besides, there's no proof that the civilization that existed before the disaster flourished precisely in our regions. Who knows what discoveries will be made if we could explore the lands that are now covered by water? I'm quite inclined to accept the cosmic theories of Horbiger. It's not impossible, in fact, that 10,000 years before our era there was a clash between the Earth and the Moon that gave the Moon its present orbit. It's also possible that the Earth attracted to itself the atmosphere of the Moon, and that this radically altered the conditions of life on our planet. It seems to me that these questions will be capable of solution on the day when a man will intuitively establish the connection between these facts, thus teaching exact science the path to follow. Himmler became an ardent supporter of Weltanschauung in the 1920s and remained so throughout the war. He is recorded as saying, Hans Horbiger's monument does not need to wait 100 years before it is built. One can employ these ideas even today. Unfortunately for Nazis, Hitler did just that. In the late summer of 1941, he ordered the Central Army Group to halt within sight of the spires of Moscow, while several mechanized divisions broke off in an ill-fated effort to capture Leningrad and other race towards the oil fields of the Ukraine. When the snow began to fall in the first week of October, the former Bohemian corporal, now supreme commander of Germany's armed forces, shrugged off warnings that his troops were not prepared for a Russian winter by saying that he would take care of it. It is assumed that he meant that he had faith in the meteorological, say that fast 5 times, department of the Ebnenerb, who had forecast the uncharacteristically mild winter using Horbiger's principles and predictions. If so, it was a fatal error. Within weeks, the vanguard of the German army found itself in the pincher-like grip of a bitter Russian winter, knitted out in thin summer uniforms without gloves, hats, boots, or even dark glasses to protect its members from snow blindness. The German newsreels made light of the situation, filming naked soldiers braving ice water baths. But the reality was far grimmer. By early November, the lubricating oil was freezing in their guns, and synthetic fuel was separating into its component parts in the petrol tanks of their trucks and tanks. By Christmas, 1 million of Germany's finest troops, the same men who had marched proudly down the Champs-Élysées after the fall of France just 2 years earlier, perished in the snow, their weapons welded to their frozen fingers. Hitler was shaken but unrepentant. His belief in his own infallibility could not countenance defeat. Fate had conspired against him. He was right. Horbiger had been right. Providence was testing his resolve. The master race must be forged anew in a trial of fire and ice, the two elements which formed the world eons ago. He ordered the encircled Sixth Army at Stalingrad to stand and fight to the last man, but even most ardent Nazis found the resolve crystallizing in the sub-zero temperatures. On February 2, 1943, after weeks of bitter hand-to-hand fighting, the remnants of Field Marshal Bock's army surrendered to the Russians, many never to see the fatherland again. A curious postscript to this story occurred in 1943 when Hitler inexplicably ordered the cessation of the top-secret V-2 rocket project. He is said to have had a dream in which he saw his potentially war-winning weapon shatter huge shards of ice floating above the Earth, bringing them crashing down and triggering a cosmic catastrophe. By the time Hitler had been persuaded that the rockets posed no danger to the world he wanted to conquer, it was too late to pursue his technological advantage. The war was lost. The Hollow Earth. No one would accuse Reich Marshal Hermann Göring of being an idealistic fool, not even behind his broad back. Nonetheless, it is a fact that he subscribed to a concept even more outlandish than Horbiger's world ice theory, one which would not have been out of place in Jules Verne's novel, the notion of the Hollow Earth. The idea dates back to the 17th century when English astronomer Edmund Halley, the discoverer of the comet which bears his name, published a paper in which he postulated a theory to explain the variance of the Earth's magnetic poles. He envisaged the Earth's crust as the outer layer of a hollow sphere with which two inner layers spun at different speeds. The poles were supposedly situated on one or both of these inner layers, and the variation in speed between the revolving spheres accounted for the variance in the cardinal points from day to day, the north, south, east, west alignment. 300 years later, a variation on this idea was embraced by a former First World War German fighter, ace, and friend of Göring by the name of Peter Bender. Bender must have suffered from shell shock because his premise clearly borders on the insane. He believed that the human race was living inside a large sphere, that the sky is its inner skin, and that the stars are no more than glimmers of light seen through the holes in its greater sphere. He called this ludicrous notion the Phantom Universe. And, incredible as it might seem, Göring was not the only high-ranking Nazi to give it a veneer of credibility. Many German naval officers accepted it too. In April 1942, a group headed by Dr. Heinz Fischer succeeded in commissioning a full-scale test in the Baltic, where a prototype radar station was established and equipped to send beams of infrared light up to the sky at an angle of 45 degrees. The hope was that the rays would bounce off the roof of the larger sphere back down to Earth, where they would produce a radar image of ships that would be out of the visual range of the vessel conducting the experiment. In this case, the target was the British fleet anchored at Scapa Flow. on the Orkney Islands. Needless to say, the experiment was a failure, and the expedition returned to face the wrath of the Fuhrer, who considered the venture a serious waste of men and resources at a critical moment in the war. Bender and the most vociferous advocates of his theory were dispatched to concentration camps. Even Göring was too embarrassed to speak in his friend's defense. Only Dr. Fischer escaped with his life. After the war, he was taken to America, where he became a significant contributor to the development of the hydrogen bomb. Oh, goody. He's OP. The real raiders of the Lost Ark. My ancestors were pagans. My forebears were heretics. Otto Rahn. When the frozen body of SS Obersturmführer Otto Rahn, 1904-39, was discovered on Kumpstein Mountain on 13 March 1939, the assumption was that he had died of exposure after falling or losing his way in a blizzard. But as his friend Paul Ledom observed, it would take up to 2 weeks to die of cold at that altitude at that time of the year. Besides, Rahn was fit, trained in survival techniques, and an experienced climber. It seemed highly suspicious that he had died just a few weeks after resigning from the SS, the very same month that his colleague, Karl Maria Willigut, was also forced to resign, his commission only to be part under the protection of the Gestapo. Was it possible that Rahn, the occult scholar, and Willigut, the certifiable visionary, shared a secret that had put both their lives at risk? There is the distinct likelihood that Rahn committed virtual suicide by starving himself to death on his beloved mountain in the manner of the 13th century Gnostic sect, the Cathars, with whom he shared a spiritual bond. It is surely no coincidence that his death occurred on the anniversary of the fall of Montsegur, the ascetics' mountain stronghold in southern France, which occurred on 14 March 1244. Holy shnikes. Rahn's connection with the Cathars is the key to the mystery, for it also ties in with Himmler's quest for the Holy Grail, the cup which Jesus is said to have used at the Last Supper, and which legend says caught drops of his blood at the crucifixion. Himmler believed that the Cathars were custodians of the Grail and that it had been smuggled out of Montsegur before Pope Innocent's forces overwhelmed the fortresses and massacred the survivors. While it may seem unlikely that a rabid anti-Christian such as Himmler would search the earth for an iconic Christian symbol, it is upon this central misunderstanding that the whole strange affair revolves. To Himmler, the Grail could not possibly be a Christian symbol for the simple reason that Jesus was not a Jew but an Aryan. The Nazis held that Orthodox Christianity bore no relation to the true teachings of Jesus or the original Christian sect which the disciples had founded. Nazi doctrine asserted that the Church, meaning the Catholic Church, had appropriated the name and principles of the true Christians in order to enrich itself at the people's expense. The Nazis justify their avowed intention to replacing Christian services and symbols with their own by arguing that their brand of paganism was not anti-Christian but true Christianity. They saw themselves as rescuing a true religion, whatever that might mean, from a corrupt church and returning it to the people. While they may have had cause to criticize the wealth and power of the church, their Orwellian doublethink did not fool anyone. Pagan propaganda. What is nearer to us than the Christian God? Dr. Felix Fischer, Dodeleben. Hitler spoke fervently and frequently against organized religion, having denounced the Catholic God as cruel and impotent for failing to intervene when his mother lay dying of cancer. The religions are all alike, no matter what they call themselves. They have no future, certainly none for the Germans, whether it is the Old Testament or the New Testament. It's all the same old Jewish swindle. One is either a German or a Christian. You cannot be both. It was clear that National Socialism was to be the new religion, or rather a revival of the old religion, meaning paganism. Our peasants have not forgotten their true religion. It still lives. The old beliefs will be brought back to honor again. The peasant will be told what the church has destroyed for him, the whole secret knowledge of nature, of the divine, the shapeless, demonic. He shall wash off the Christian veneer and bring out a religion peculiar to our race. Our peasantry still lives in heathen beliefs and values. Through the peasantry we shall rely and really be able to destroy Christianity, because there is in them a true religion rooted in nature and blood. And if rationing is to be believed, one night in 1933 Hitler announced his intention to tear up Christianity root and branch. He declared, "We must prevent the churches from doing anything but what they are doing now, that is, losing ground day by day. Do you really believe the masses will ever be Christian again? Nonsense, never again. That story is finished. No one will listen to it again. But we can hasten matters. The parsons will be made to dig their own graves. They will betray their God to us." Rationing has recently been discredited as a witness to history, but even if his quotations are questionable, another influential Nazi voiced the regime's dislike of organized religion in no uncertain terms. Alfred Rosenberg had written of the day he hoped to establish a national Reich church. On the day of its foundation, the Christian cross must be removed from all churches, cathedrals, and chapels, and it must be superseded by the only unconquerable symbol, the swastika. Himmler, however, would have preferred to do away with the organized religion altogether. At the funeral of Reinhard Heydrich, he declared, "This Christendom, this greatest pestilence which could have befallen us in history, which has weakened us with every conflict, we must finish with." All right, we're going to stop it there. The next section of this chapter is the Luciferian Reformation. Scary, spooky, very spooky. Oh. Well, hopefully things go well and the show stays intact, but I do not know. And most recently in my life, I've been waiting for my vehicle for over a month to get out of the mechanic's office, aka Lon's Automotive, and yeah, it's been over a month. I used a truck and then the motor blew last week, so I haven't been able to go back to work. And man, this show costs so much for me to do, but I'm gonna keep trying. I'm going to try to adapt and overcome and persevere, and hopefully my chickens start laying eggs to the point where I can live off their doings. That'd be great. But on that note, thank you so much once again for being here with me tonight as we learn about our history. Therefore, we are doomed not to repeat it. If we don't learn our history, we're doomed to repeat it. If we learn it, we won't be doomed. But anyways, thank you to all of our friends on Mirror Paradox Media's Facebook, Spreaker, Twitter, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Twitch, and wherever else you may be listening beyond the Omniverse tonight. I had a wonderful time, and I can't wait to do it again next weekend. It's as much of a surprise to me as it is to you, I would say. Yeah, things come up last minute sometimes. We'll see. Might be trippy TikToks and story time again. Might be something else. Generally story time on Sundays, because, guests don't generally like to come on Sundays. Don't forget, you guys, we're all in this together. Together we can make the world a bit better. And together, my friends, we are Paradox Media, because without you, there is no us. Until next time, night-night, love and light, have a wonderful rest of your weekend and week. Don't work too hard, don't take life too seriously, and appreciate every day as a gift. Because not everybody gets the same opportunity that we do. I will see you back here, same crazy time, same crazy place. Take care of my use.